Hi everyone, my name's Tom. Thanks for joining me in this video. Here I want to talk about different types of edges. So this is something I think is really important with painting. It's a great way to elevate your painting immediately, whatever your current standard. I've got loads more of these videos to come, so please do consider subscribing. Don't forget to hit the like button and do feel free to leave me a comment with any other subjects that you might want me to cover. I've already spoken about edges in some different videos. They're a really important and very, very useful part of painting, whatever your medium. I want to talk about them in the context of watercolour. In the other videos, we've looked at using much softer and losser edges in the shadows and kind of harder edges in the lights. In this particular video, I want to talk a lot more about the interaction of your subject or your object with its setting or with its background and how to make that integrated in a more natural way. But to recap very quickly, when we're talking about edges, it's the kind of how we're seeing one area or one object and the way that it interacts with something next to it, basically, in very, very simple terms. So that kind of interaction between there and there, or here and here. Everything within this shadow side is very, very soft. There's still enough information to see that we have an eye and to see that we have a cheek and the mane and we have a bit of the kind of muzzle and the nose here. There's still enough definition to give us that information, but everything is very soft and it's very fuzzy. The idea here is that on the other side, say here, for example, this shape here, the areas where the light is hitting, the direct light, so the direct light is coming in from here, these are illuminated by the direct light, and these edges are much sharper and much harder, much more defined. So where the light is hitting, we're getting a bit more of a strong feeling of definition, whereas the shadows, which are lit by the bounced or the reflected or the ambient light, that ambient light is much weaker, so it describes things in a much weaker way. So in watercolour, I'm painting a lot more wet into wet or damp into damp within the shadow areas, and then purposely leaving sharper, harder lines in the light areas. How far you take this is up to you. Like here, I went very, very wet into wet, very, very soft. It's almost abstract. As we come into here, I wanted a little bit more definition, so I waited a little bit longer and used a slightly stronger consistency of paint, so we still get some wet edges, but they don't bleed together so much. Very quickly, let's look at this idea in the context of a couple of others, and then we'll talk more about integrating your subject into its background. So if we look at this lady here, we've clearly got really strong, lovely kind of hard, sharp lights hitting here. Very strong defined lights. Much stronger, sharper lights catching there. But as we drift into the shadows, in particular, look at this area here, everything is much softer. Everything flows together a little bit more. Basically here, this whole area is in shadow, so I've painted this whole area from here into there, all the way down into here, all painted kind of wet into wet or damp into damp. The timing dictates the level of blurring together that you get and the softness of the mark. And it even applies to something like this. This whole area here is in shadow, and I've let the colours from the tree base drift into the shadows of the bank, wet into the road, and everything kind of merges together in a very soft way. And then over here, as we drift into the focal point, we've also got then areas of shadow all kind of drift together. You know, the shadow here sort of drifts into the shadow of the building, it drifts into the shadow down here, all of the shadow here kind of ties together nicely. And then when the light is hitting, the direct light, everything is much more strongly and sharply defined and focused. And partly we're getting a feeling of softness here because the tones are close together. So that kind of is like an optical way of softening edges by putting the tones together. And in other places, I'm very simply just painting them damp into damp. So next, let's look at edges in a slightly different context. So a really fantastic representation of this principle of integrating a subject into its background in a natural way, I think is represented in this book called Imaginative Realism by a fantastic artist and amazing tutor, James Gurney. I highly recommend this book, and also Colour and Light down there. Even if you're into painting representational paintings, not from imagination, this book is fantastic. It's fascinating, especially if you're into more technical side of kind of colour, painting, And the materials as well. Both of these books make a great pair. But what I wanted to show you in here is Rembrandt's Windmill, which is a fantastic example of what we're going to talk about here. So as James says, he calls this the windmill principle, and it's this painting here, The Mill by Rembrandt. And what we're specifically looking at here is the blades of the windmill. And as James says, each vein of the windmill represents one of the 4 possible tonal arrangements, or as I like to think of it, the way that the subject or the object interacts with its background. So we're talking tonally. So these are the 4 ways that we can think about an edge or the subject with its background. We have light on light. So the background and the foreground are very, very similar, if not the same in tone. So we have an almost lost edge. Here, though, we have the light blade, the same as this, but the background is purposely darker, and that negative dark shape traps the light on the positive shape of the blade. So we have light against dark. Over here, though, the blade is more in shadow against a lighter background, so it has a very defined edge, whereas over here, even more visible here, we have a dark blade against a dark background, so we have dark on dark. So those are the 4 ways that the subject can interact with its background. And as I said, this helps the subject, whatever it is, sit in the painting or sit in its setting a little bit better, a bit more naturally. As James says here, it can help you avoid the pasted on look that happens if you don't concentrate on losing some edges and accentuating others. So it's about creating this contrast of kind of soft and hard, lost and found. Very quickly before we dive into the demo, let's look at this idea in context a little bit. So quite often light against dark is a very common, easy one to see. You know, any of these areas here and here, so many different areas are an easy one, light against dark. But if we were to just do light against dark, we would fall into the trap of this very kind of cut out and pasted look. So we also need to have dark on light. So here is a darker tone against a lighter background. Here we've got, it's a bit more abstract down here, but we've got darker tones against lighter background. So that kind of ticks that box. The next one is dark on dark. So this is when we have these lovely soft shadows in particular. So here, for example, is a huge area of kind of dark against dark. So that's a nice area there. Here we've got kind of dark on dark. So we've got some lovely lost edges there. The one that I often miss, or that I don't get very much of, and that I'm trying to push a little bit more in my own work, is the light against light on edge. And I think this is one of the least common ones we see, but it's a great way to lose an edge. You know, if I was really pushing it, I could say there's kind of a light on light edge there. And also there's just about a light on light edge there. There's the 3 other types of edges, and that's enough to give an interesting and not cut out feel to the painting. Okay, so next up, another big cat, but we've got light on dark there. We've got plenty of dark on light. We do have some areas of dark on dark, so we've got dark on dark over here. That works really nicely. And also we've got kind of dark on dark there, so similar areas of tone. Again, though, I don't have a huge amount of light on light. You know, there's a tiny bit of light on light. There's a tiny bit of light on light there, and a tiny bit there, you know, little dribs of it here. But again, I could push that idea further in my own work. But again, there's enough of this variation of edge to create an interesting interaction with the background. Okay, so let's go with the obvious ones first. Loads of light against dark here, here, all the way over here. We've also got plenty of dark on light. You know, we've got lovely edges here. Big areas of dark against light, big areas of kind of dark on light. It doesn't have to be just light, but just darker than the tone that's behind it, or significant difference. We've got plenty of dark on dark too. We've got all of this area down in the bottom right, where I've just let everything kind of merge together as dark on dark. All of this kind of merges together. All of this here just merges into there. And there's a little bit more light on light going on here. We've got a tiny little bit of light on light there. I purposely left a little bit of light in the background there so that we could lose an edge. We've got a little bit of light on light, a lost edge between there. Light on light there. You could even say a few of these little spots have just been left as light on light. So there's a bit more variation of all 4 types of edge there. It would have been very easy, for example, for me to want to really define this edge of the leg, but there's enough information there between that edge and this edge to give us, or let our mind fill in this edge here and let our mind fill in this edge here, and that makes it a bit more engaging for the viewer. And then very finally, let's look at the still life. Keep it easy. We go light on dark, the really obvious ones, all of that there, all of this here is very light on a very dark background, very sharp, hard edges. This is a nice kind of light on dark example, as is that. We've got a little bit less dark on light, but that's quite nice. Where have we got some dark on light? We've got kind of this edge here is kind of dark on a lighter background. This edge here is kind of dark on a lighter background, but there's not a huge amount of that going on. But there's enough kind of soft and lost edges everywhere else to make up for that. We don't need to always force everything as much as possible. The next one is dark on dark, and there is plenty of that going on in this one. All of this area here you could consider kind of shadow on shadow, dark on dark. Although the tones are quite separate here, you could still consider that kind of dark on dark or shadow on shadow. The colours here and the tones really kind of blend together, and again here they kind of soften together. Everything kind of softens together there, shadow in shadow. Everything here kind of fuzzes together, shadow in shadow. Everything sort of drifts together in the shadowy mid-tone. So there's loads of shadow on shadow, dark on dark. Something I really don't have yet again in this one is a huge amount of light on light, and that's something that I'm going to be really looking for in the demonstration we're going to go into now. You can hop over to my Patreon page to watch like a longer 20-25 minute narrated time lapse of what we're about to watch. You can hop over to my Patreon page and check out everything else I've got on offer there. Let's have a look at the demo. So I kick off here with a very watery mix of the new Gamboge, a little bit quinacridone red dropped in here and there, just to darken it, but very, very watery, very, very loose. Not really thinking about the edges too much at this stage, because anything that I paint at this stage is going to have a very soft wet into wet feel. I did want to go a little bit darker on the neck feathers and a little bit warmer, so slightly stronger consistency of paint, but really very much wet into wet. And then here I didn't want the purpley colour to bleed into the yellow colour too much, if at all. So I almost treated this as a separate area, but again, very, very light, letting the colours of the ultramarine blue and the quinacridone red just kind of flow together. So again, lots of very soft flowing colours here, but we're not really... I am starting to think about the way that the bird interacts with the background. Look how I've left some areas of whites of the page in certain places, but these initial colours are so light that I'm not considering it hugely. It will come more into play later on. I'm now looking to paint in the bird. So within the shape of the bird, I'm now looking for different variations of soft edge between different areas of the shadow. So the soft, slight shadow of the bill, very softly kind of damp into damp going into the dark of the face. In turn, very, very softly, ever so slightly damp into damp into then that kind of red shadow colour on the neck, which I've exaggerated from the photo. So at the moment, we're kind of from the bill down into the face, down into the red on the neck, has all been painted kind of damp into damp, so we get different variations of soft edges. I'm going to take that exact same approach into the rest of the bird. Very direct brush strokes, letting the nice flowing colours underneath show through, and we start to get this contrast of sharper washes on top against the more flowing washes underneath. And again, all the different tones here, I'm trying to let them just flow together. I tried to kind of initiate a soft edge between the underside of the wing there, where it meets the white feathers of kind of the leg and rump area. Again, trying to create a kind of softer feel within the shadows, because as I said, we're lit by that ambient light. It's less describing, and therefore everything's a little bit softer. Now though, I'm starting to think about the interaction between the bird and the background, and this is when we get into like the Rembrandt Windmill, which I showed you at the start, and just thinking about the different types of edges that we can create. We're going to come back to that a little bit more in a moment. Very simple for the eye. I go a little bit more in detail, and you can see it a bit more clearly in the narrated time lapse over on Patreon. But here, notice how I'm not just painting the dark green around the whole bird. I'm purposely leaving spots lighter. Some of those spots are nice and light against a kind of shadow area of the bird. Other spots are light against light. This was a very important area up here where I wanted to get some dark against dark areas, so the kind of the far wing against the dark of the background. But I also wanted to use the green of the background there, not too heavy and dark, to trap the lovely shape and light on the top of the horn there. But I also, the top of the head just behind the horn, I wanted to leave light against light. So I'm looking for all these different types of areas. And we're going to analyse those a little bit closer now. Okay guys, so one last look at these edges. We have plenty of light on dark, all of these kind of edges here. Even these edges here are kind of light on dark, light on dark, light on dark, light on dark. So anything kind of like that. Fairly straightforward as well to be a nice contrast to that. We have dark on light. So this is anywhere, these sorts of edges here, you know, this little bit here. All of this is also kind of dark on light there, dark on light there. We've got a nice combination of lots of different edges. So that's fairly straightforward. Then we start to get into the ones where we have similar tones meeting each other. And so that's kind of dark on dark here, dark on dark there. A little bit of kind of dark on dark here and there. So kind of varying these edges in lots of different places, so plenty of dark on dark. And even here the tones are close enough together that we could consider that kind of dark on dark, or at least shadow on shadow. So we're creating kind of softer and lost edges. There are places where I purposely painted these wet into wet so that they physically merge together to create a soft or a lost edge. And then places like this one over here, it's more that the tones are very close together, so kind of they optically create a soft edge. They're not as dynamic or as obvious as, say, a very hard edge here or a very hard edge there. And then very finally, as I've mentioned a few times, what I'm trying to do more often in my work is create these light against light edges, and I've really managed to leave a nice one there. It kind of suggests it. I would eventually rub out the pencil and we'd have a light on light edge there. We've got a light edge there, light on light here, and even a little bit of light on light there. And then kind of over here, that's sort of a little bit of light on light, but not too much. But as I said before, it's not about having loads and loads of these different edges necessarily. It's just making sure that we've got a nice variety of these 4 different types of edges to create this contrast of light and shadow, and to help this bird sit a little bit more naturally in its setting and not have that kind of stuck on, pasted on look to it. So that's it guys, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you found it useful as always. Don't forget you can see links in the description to all the places you can find me, including my Patreon channel and my soon to be launched in the beginning of 2022, my online watercolour school, along with my website, Instagram page and all of that stuff. Don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more to come, and hit the notifications bell. Thumbs up and comments can really help me out and give me an idea of what's working and what's not. Until next time guys, happy living, happy painting, and I will catch you very soon.